We've thrashed this image here to death, but that's the stack of the legacy.
There it is.
Legacy plans. Obviously, a key goal with the unitary plan and a key task for this council was to try and simplify this planning framework. The unitary plan will replace the legacy regional policy statement and the 11 existing regional and district plans. The reason 13 is acceptable as an answer is Auckland City had broken its district plan down into several parts. Many of those plans are well over a decade old, and some of the legacy councils were gearing up to do a full district plan review or review of the RPS. So they are getting a bit worn around the edges. Another key goal was clearly try and get greater consistency across Auckland where appropriate, and a chance to bring the planning framework, these planning rules under the RMA, in line with the Auckland plan as adopted by the council. Just a point to note, you're probably well aware of this, the Hauraki Gulf Islands district plan had just gone through a review prior to amalgamation, so at this point of time the district plan controls for the Gulf Islands are not included in the unitary plan. They could be incorporated at some point in the future. This diagram again just showing that the unitary plan does include the regional policy statement. So we've got four major components. We've got that regional policy statement, we've got the regional coastal plan, we have some regional planning rules around air and water, and we have the district plan rules around development and subdivision.
Are you counting the Hauraki Gulf District part of the, is that a separate plan in your 13?
Yes, yeah.
That's a separate plan in the 13, yep. All right, so, obviously the unitary plan prepared under the RMA gives effect to the Auckland plan by managing growth, development and natural resources in urban and rural parts of Auckland. It also has lots of provisions to protect our natural and historic heritage. It manages water quality, air quality and the coastal marine area. So that's the kind of core essence of what the unitary plan is trying to do at the very highest level. Some principles were set by the council as the plan was being developed, and those are the principles on the screen there. That link to the Auckland plan was seen as critical, focusing on outcomes, not just regulation for the sake of having regulation. Where we do have rules and regulation, let's get that regulation in proportion to the impacts that we're really trying to manage, so not try and crack a nut with a sledgehammer, but if there is a significant development proposal, we want to have the right tools in place to deal with it. We wanted the plan to be simple, bold and innovative, or you did, user-friendly, avoiding repetition, clarity and consistency, and using the web as much as possible. And we've had the discussion around hard copy, and certainly acknowledge that some people do refer to hard copy, but the overwhelming majority of people participating in the hearings have not been using the hard copy at all. They've been very comfortable using the web-based plan, and that's because we've tried to make that web-based version as interactive and usable as possible, especially in terms of the maps. So we've taken a big leap forward in the way that we show maps electronically compared to legacy councils. The structure of the unitary plan, we have part one, which is the introduction and the strategic direction, which is where the regional policy statement sits in part one. Part two, we have the objectives and policies at a regional plan level and a district plan level. Then in part three, that's where we get down to the real nuts and bolts of the rules, what you can and can't do, when you're a permitted activity, when you're a discretionary activity, that sits in part three. Height controls, density controls, they all sit in part three. Then in part four, we have definitions. Part five is where you'll find the lists of protected trees, buildings, ecological areas. They're sitting in part five as appendices. And then we have some non-statutory guidance. And lastly, we have the list of all of the designations in Auckland and all of the conditions that attach to those designations. So that's the overall structure of the plan. Another way of looking at the structure is just looking at it in terms of RMA sitting up here, national policy statement and national environmental standards. And then we get into the unitary plan, which has the regional policy statement, and then we have the regional planning rules, the district plan, and the regional coastal plan. So that's just another way of looking at how the unitary plan is structured. Another key fundamental to understand, and I think you've all got a pretty good grasp of this with the unitary plan, is that every piece of land and every part of the coastal marine area within Auckland has a zone applied to it. whether that's a residential zone, a business zone, a rural zone, or one of the coastal zones, every piece of land or coastal marine area has a zone. Some parts of Auckland also have a precinct applied to them on the maps. What the precinct does is it just provides a bit more detail for parts of Auckland that have been carefully planned in the past, primarily by the legacy councils. Some work done by Auckland Council to just provide a bit more nuance, sometimes a bit more flexibility for very good reason. So some parts of Auckland, Flatbush to Long Bay, examples of where a lot of detailed planning work done in the past, a lot of environment court processes. The zones alone could not manage to deal with those locations, so we use precincts. And then we have the overlays. The overlays deal with the natural and historic heritage primarily, so it's the heritage buildings, it's the ecological areas, it's the outstanding landscapes, it's the view shafts. Those are what we call overlays. So that package of mapping layers, and they all relate, as Councillor Darby mentioned, back to rules and objectives and policies, you need to read as a package. So there'll be some parts of Auckland where all you need to look at is a zone because your piece of land has nothing but a zone. That's it. There's no overlay over it. There's no precinct. But in other locations, you do have to read the zone, the precinct controls, and any overlays that deal with ecology or heritage and the like. So that's kind of the mechanics of the unitary plan.
Okay.
Any questions on?
Councillor Casey.
It was the same, well, a similar comment to before. John, you said that the vast majority of people who were interacting with the unitary plan submitters were online. But our duty now is to inform the wider Auckland public, especially if the hearings panel go out of scope. So there'll be a lot more people affected by decisions possibly than to date. So, you know, your argument for not having a hard copy doesn't work with me, that was all.
We're coming back to that.
And I think let's sit
Do
with
more
that.
work on that.
And, as we've done with these other things for the councillors who are really passionate about this, Councillor Casey, Councillor Crum, maybe, a couple of others, let's get together and really try and kind of nut some of this through. Be good. Okay, any other questions on this? I think this is pretty straightforward. What we might do is, because time is a little bit of the essence, we'll cover the timeline process, and I think that may be as far as we can get by midday today.
That's all we have.
And I think, is that, yeah,
that's
it
it
is all we
anyway.
have.
Yeah.
I thought there was more.
Well,
We've-
there is right now.
But wait,
Blimey,
there's more.
God, after all, we're finished. So, John.
All right, so enough on the mechanics of the plan and the RMA. So getting down to the timeline that we're in here. So what we're showing in the blue boxes is the key milestones looking backwards. So September 2012, we released some early draft chapters, not the entire draft unitary plan, just some really draft early provisions to a wide range of key stakeholders. Local boards had over 20 meetings with key stakeholders around about September, October, November 2012, and staff had ongoing meetings that they had prior to September 2012 with a wide range of key stakeholders in mana whenua on those early draft chapters of parts of the plan. But then we had the real big release, which was the middle blue box, and that was the draft Auckland Unitary Plan, March to May 2013, and hopefully you can read the green box there, but many of you were heavily involved in this process. 249 public meetings across Auckland over that 3-month period, 21,210 pieces of written feedback, and then moving forward after that we had 22 elected member workshops involving local boards, including 2 full days of mapping workshops, and then we had the 5-day Auckland Plan Committee, as it was at that time, meeting to debate and make decisions on what would actually go into the proposed plan, which was notified, the last blue box, 30 September 2013. We ran a series of open days as soon as the unitary plan was launched to really explain to Aucklanders what the unitary plan was, the importance of getting involved and how to make a submission on the unitary plan. So that was up to the point of notification. So quick quiz question. How many submissions, without looking at the next slide, how many submissions were there on the unitary plan when notified?
12.
All right. Mark, no, Mark, you've read the slide. There was a 9,000 something over there.
9,800, I said.
Yeah, it was. It was Councillor Penrose.
No, I don't want a chocolate.
Oh, okay. Mark,
I'll have a chocolate.
And for anyone
I was close.
questioning, and for the Lagoimas that will arise, has ratepayers' money been spent on giving councillors treats? No.
No,
Paid
private.
Declare
for
it.
privately, and
By
then the
yourself.
accusations may well be bribery and corruption.
Declare it in the
It's called,
register.
actually, let's just, yeah,
Put it on
let's,
your
how about we
pecuniary
actually
interest,
just enjoy
Get it on the
Actually, you put
register.
it I was
a
going to
little bit
give
of
you the
frivolity.
exact number.
I
but
I
I'm
have
on
got a
diet.
confectionery interest.
You've got a
Confectionery
confectionery
interest.
interest. Okay, right.
I've got one of those too. All right, so this is quite important here. So the submission closed
Oh, for
28th
the
of February,
TV
so we had
audience.
quite an extended submission period, five months, which is well beyond the normal, but quite appropriate given the scale of the entry plan. So we had over 9,443 submissions, and 161 of those are from community groups, so resident groups, environmental groups, and so on. That breaks down to almost 100,000 individual points requesting changes to the unitary plan or supporting parts of the unitary plan, so 93,600 submission points. And then we had the further submission period, so there was a 1-month period where people could join the process who hadn't previously been involved and either support or object to one of the 9,443 submissions. So we received a further 3,921 further submissions. Some of those people were actually already in the process. So it wasn't that we got another 3,921 extra people or organisations, but there were a large number of new people joined at that point in time, and that broke down to 1.4 million points of further submission, which just became quite massive in terms of the data that sits behind all of this. The hearings began September 2014, and this is the most recent information from the panel staff. They've had approximately 9,000 submitters attending hearings since September 2014. There might be a bit of double counting there. That might be a submitter turning up 2 or 3 times to 2 or 3 different hearings, but that's still a pretty high volume. 243 days the panel has been sitting in hearings, which is probably the largest hearings process we'll ever see, I would have thought. So 243 full days of hearings, and 10,500 pieces of written evidence have been filed with the panel since September 2014. So that's the scale of what the panel's been having to deal with. So now a timeline moving forward. The hearings are scheduled to finish in about 3 or 4 weeks' time, second week of May. Then the panel goes into deliberations. They're already deliberating on some of the topics that have finished, but they really go into their intensive deliberations May, June and July. And in parallel with that, that's when we're running these Auckland Development Committee information meetings. Then we have the confidential briefing for elected members after receiving the panel's recommendations. So we get the recommendation 22 July. You've heard this before. 27 July is where we're proposing the confidential briefing, and that's in your agenda. All of these dates are in your agenda. The drop-in sessions, so 2 full days where elected members can drop in and receive some advice on finding what you want to find in the panel's recommendations. Then we have the decision-making, 16, 17 and 18 of August, and the council is required, as James mentioned right back at the beginning, to release its recommendations, its decisions on the 19th of August. And that's Chair's presentation.
That's it. Right. Questions just on the process, Mark?
I know it was briefly referred to earlier and left unresolved, but look, I think it would be useful if there was a way for local board members to be involved in the drop-in sessions. I appreciate the focus is on making sure the decision makers get what they need. But again, I know in October when we were looking at the out-of-scope stuff, there were very useful conversations I saw between local board members and councillors on some detailed issues. So just encourage officers to think about that.
Yeah, good stuff.
Any other questions? If not, can I just first of all acknowledge our staff. This was our first meeting of this, what's going to be quite a long series of information meetings. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, and I apologise for getting a bit grumpy about our quorum issues, but the huge amount of work that goes into the preparation for these meetings, I think, does need to be respected. And as we get into this and it becomes a little bit more interactive, I think we'll find this invaluable. So I do encourage councillors and our local board chairs and portfolio holders to please attend, because I am going to be a little bit tough on, if we have had the chance to go through this, we ain't going to be going back. So, you know, this is be there or be square. You really do need to step into this opportunity now, and I acknowledge those of you who have. Obviously stuff comes up and difficulties arise, so, you know, understood as well, but we'll be working pretty hard to make sure everyone's here. So I'll declare the meeting closed and thank everyone warmly for being here. Oh, we just, I'll move that we, no, we don't do it, because it doesn't,
Well,
done. Thank you all.